Cat talk, what we do is use Pilar's Zoom link, but I think this time we shared the grepg link.
It is recording now.
Yeah. I just started
Might be
recording.
the reason why we are not having the hand on this, Pilar.
Yeah.
Okay,
Next
Jolie,
time.
so you
Yeah.
record the session, or if not, you can make me co-host and I can do it as you prefer.
Yeah,
I'm currently recording it, and also I can share I can make you the co-host of this meeting.
Okay, perfect. So then you will have to send us the recording and so we can put it on the website. Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Okay, so we're almost ready. Sorry about this.
I understand so well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So everything works in the class, Laurence? Oh, I see. Yeah, I see Mireia. Right. Yeah. Okay, and I'll pass the floor to. So I'll do the introduction and then pass the floor to Sylvia. So I don't know if we can see her too. Will we be able to see her?
Espera un momento.
Okay.
Pilar? Hello. Should you introduce the event before I introduce Laurence or?
Yes, yes. Shall I go ahead? We don't see you though.
Yep, I'm going to the camera now. Do you see me now?
Oh, I see. Yeah. Now, okay. Where it says LSC interpreter, right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, so we are ready. So if you want, we can start. Okay, so we are delighted to welcome you to this hybrid event, which brings together the Research Hub in Gesture Studies and the Facultat de Traducció i Ciències del Llenguatge at UPF, and particularly our undergraduate students.
Pilar, one moment, please. We have a problem with the sound.
Oh.
Just one moment.
Okay. Yeah, hybrid events are.
Can you talk, Pilar, please?
Yes. Are you hearing me?
Should you try? Yeah, go on.
Hello. Are you connecting well? Let's see.
Yeah. Does it work? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. It seems it works now.
Okay, so I start again. Sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, now let's see. We are delighted. You hearing well? Okay. Yes. Okay. So again, we're delighted to welcome you to this hybrid event, which brings together the Research Hub in Gesture Studies and the Facultat de Traducció i Ciències del Llenguatge at UPF, and particularly our undergraduate students in Sign Language Studies and the Sign Language Research Group. So we are especially pleased that an entire class is attending today's event, providing a valuable opportunity for students to engage directly with current research at the interface between sign and spoken language studies. We are especially pleased that Laurence Meurant has accepted our joint invitation, and we hope her interdisciplinary talk will foster new exchanges between gesture studies, sign language research, and language teaching. So I would like to thank Gemma Barbarà and Silvia Gavarró for their invaluable efforts in helping to organize this event as a hybrid event. And I would also like to acknowledge the support of the Department of Translation and Language Sciences, whose contribution has made it possible to provide the interpretation into Catalan Sign Language. And also thanks to our interpreter for helping make this event accessible to a wider community. It is now my pleasure to pass the floor to Silvia Gavarró, who has worked very closely with Laurence Meurant for many years and completed her PhD under her supervision. Sylvia is therefore in a unique position to introduce our speaker and her work. Thanks, Sylvia, and I'll pass the floor to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Pilar. Today, we are truly honored to have with us Professor Laurence Meurant. She's a senior research associate for the FRS-FNRS at the Faculty of Arts at the University of Namur in Belgium. Professor Meurant is a leading expert in sign language linguistics, particularly renowned for her pioneering work in the contrastive analysis of sign languages and spoken languages. Her PhD was the first scholarly publication to describe LSFV, French-Belgian Sign Language, focusing on the use of eye gaze. Since then, she has extensively published on many topics, including corpus linguistics, discourse analysis, deaf education, and sign language interpreting, among others. She has been awarded several prizes and grants for her work. As the head of the LSFV lab, she has directed the development of the LSFV corpus and its comparable counterpart, the Frappé corpus, which is a corpus of multimodal French, an almost unique data set in the world. From the very beginning, Professor Meurant's research has had an important applied component, resulting in the creation of resources such as the contextual bilingual LSFV French dictionary and the MOSI, a bilingual reading guide from French to LSFV. Today, she will guide us through a fascinating exploration of how the multimodal study of sign and spoken languages challenges and expands the traditional linguistic theories. Thank you very much, Laurence, for accepting our invitation. I am very happy to have you here today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, and thank you, Pilar, for this incredible introduction. And good afternoon, everyone, both in Barcelona and online. And first, let me thank Professor Pilar Prieto for her invitation, which is a great honor for me. And many thanks also to Gemma Barbera and Silvia Gavarro Lopez, who together made this meeting possible. And I would also like to thank the students for being here at the end of their academic term and the interpreters who are making this talk accessible in Catalan Sign Language. I hope you can hear me well and see my slides clearly. Yes. And when it came time to propose a title and an abstract for today, I wanted to use this opportunity to look back and reflect on the reasons why at the beginning of this millennium, in fact, it seemed important and even necessary to me to study sign languages and to draw on the insights they provide in order to revisit our understanding of language itself. So this is the path I would like us to follow today, starting with the question of how the boundaries of language have been defined and concluding with some recent research conducted at the LSFB lab of the University of Namur, which shed new light on these issues. So let me start by briefly revisiting the way linguistics has traditionally drawn the boundaries of what counts as language. In the 19th century, linguistics became a scientific discipline through the comparison of Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, and other Indo-European languages. This European intellectual movement showed that languages could be studied scientifically by identifying regular and systematic patterns called correspondences in comparative grammar. This approach relied, of course, on written records. And as a result of this intellectual movement, language came to be understood as a formal and abstract system, organized through phonemes, words, and grammar. This view shaped Saussure's work and the development of structuralism and formal linguistics also. With the first oral recordings, linguistics gradually opened up to spoken language, and this led to the discovery of a new object of study. It also led to a new distinction, the distinction between language itself and so-called paralinguistic features, that is, vocal qualities and variations such as intensity, pitch, intonation, accent, etc. But the line between the two, the language and paralinguistic features, is not always clear, especially in prosody, for example. The introduction of video recordings made it clear that speakers do not only move their lips when they speak. Their hands, head, and upper body are also actively involved. This new perspective brings into focus a new boundary again, between this time verbal, what is produced by the vocal tract, and the non-verbal, that is, all other bodily actions. Despite this evolution and the increasing diversity of ways in which language has been observed by linguists through writing, spectrograms, and video, the view that language can be appropriately studied as just speak or text remains strong in linguistics. And yet, no known language relies solely on speech. The cradle of all language is face-to-face communication, and all face-to-face language use involves the visual modality. So we may ask, what exactly do we study when we study language as linguists? One way to explore this question is through the thought experiment proposed by Viliocco and colleagues. What would linguistics look like if it had begun with sign languages rather than spoken languages? Let us turn to the next question. How did sign languages enter the field of linguistics? In 1960, Stokey's work on the structure of American Sign Language showed that sign languages are fully fledged languages, not a form of pantomime. This also meant that language could no longer be seen as limited to speech. In retrospect, this was a major discovery for modern linguistics, one that could have led to a theoretical revolution in the field, in fact. However, it did not lead to a revolution. On the contrary, at first, research focused on legitimizing sign languages by emphasizing their similarity to spoken languages. Signs were described in terms of their equivalence to morphemes and words in spoken languages in an assimilationist perspective. In order to be recognized, sign languages were reduced to their code, their abstract and systemic codes. About 20 years later, an increasing number of linguists began to explicitly address aspects of sign languages that had previously been downplayed to secure their legitimacy. The iconic nature of signs and structures, the use of multiple simultaneous articulators, and the organization of space, that is, features that are not discrete or purely systemic, but rather gradient and analogical in nature, but that are in fact central properties of sign languages. This differential approach emphasized the differences between sign languages and spoken languages and the need to draw on concepts beyond formal, arbitrary, and abstract categories in order to adequately describe sign languages. Across these two tendencies, the comparison between sign languages and spoken languages has remained systematically biased. Sign languages have consistently been defined in relation to spoken languages, either through assimilation or through contrast. This asymmetrical comparison has not led to a genuine rethinking of what language is, of it should be studied in order to, it has not led to the reflection on how it should be studied in order to account for both types of languages. As a result, linguistics as a whole has in a sense missed the opportunity to fully realize the game-changing potential of sign languages. This missed opportunity is also visible in the relationship between the study of sign languages and gesture studies. Whereas in classical rhetoric, the articulation between gesture and speech was considered essential, linguists focused on the abstract code of language largely turned away from gesture until relatively recently. In the 1970s, however, research emerging from psychology and cognitive science began to focus on nonverbal communication. Key scholars such as Kendon and McNeil show that gesture and speech are part of a single process in the production of utterances. But for a long time, these different lines of research remained separate, and linguists did not really address the link between speech and bodily movement. Gesture studies and linguistics have had relatively little dialogue, and when they have, it has mostly been initiated by gesture researchers rather than linguists. Within linguistics, gestures have largely remained subordinate to speech, and the physical separation between the vocal and manual channels has reinforced this distinction, giving it an appearance of obviousness. In 1999, Karen Emery published an article entitled "Do Signers Gesture?" This question reflects the fact that sign language researchers, such as Liddell, Metzger, or Enbeck Pedersen, and so on, have generally been more open than spoken language researchers to the idea that grammar and gesture are integrated within language. If the 1960 revolution had really taken place and sign languages had been taken seriously from the start, the question, do signers gesture, would probably not have come up, or at least the idea of gesture would have been very different. What remains of the notion of gesture, if gesture is seen as a manual activity subordinate to speech, when we look at sign language data? In sign languages, the physical separation between articulary modalities does not map onto a separation between gesture and language. So what in the end is a gesture? These questions push us beyond the strict division between modalities and towards the relationship between iconicity, arbitrariness, gradients, and categorization. To do this, we need to move beyond the divide between signed and spoken languages and take seriously what their comparison reveals. To illustrate this shift, I will now show you an excerpt from the Pixar animated short film Paperman. We will watch the opening sequence, and after that, I will present you how a French speaker and then a LSFB signer each retell one of the scenes from this opening. Here is Paperman then. Let's first look at the French speaker, recounting the moment when the sheet of paper flies through the air and lands on the woman's face.
Et puis là, à ce moment-là, il y a une feuille de papier qui lui tombe sur le bras, puis il continue son chemin, et il y a une femme qui passe devant lui en courant, et qui rattrape sa feuille, qui la glisse dans son dossier qu'elle tient à la main, et elle vient se poster à 1 mètre de lui. Lui a aussi un dossier, et à ce moment-là, s'échappe de son dossier aussi un papier qui tombe sur la figure de la fille, et alors il reprend le papier.
And now look at how the LSFB signer recounts exactly the same passage. As you can see in the still pictures, just at the right of the videos, these examples reveal strong similarities between the speaker's gesture and the signer's signs. How can we account for this in a coherent way? How can we move beyond the bias of articulatory channels or modalities, which prevents us from truly addressing the question of the status of these forms? Neuroscience and cognitive studies converge in showing that speech and gesture are intimately linked in language, both in production and in comprehension. As Baviles already pointed out in 1990, we separate them at our own risk. Ultimately, if we want to investigate the extent to which signs overlap with speakers' gestures, we may need to avoid missing once again the game-changing potential of sign languages. This means seriously pursuing an approach to language that takes into account the full range of actions involved in languaging, using comparable concepts and categories. One particularly interesting approach in this regard is comparative semiotics. This approach is based on the triad of symbol, index, and icon of Peirce's semiotics. Peirce distinguishes between 3 main types of signs: symbols, which signify through convention, for example, a national flag, a red traffic light meaning stop, mathematical signs, etc., or within language, we can see at the examples of many lexical words. For example, the word cat, tree, house, or the sign never, for example, like that in LSFB. The second category of signs, the second type of signs following pairs, is indices, which signify through direct connection. For example, smoke as an indice of fire, footprints as a sign that someone has passed by, or dark clouds as sign of rain. And in our language practice, a pointing with a finger. And the last category of signs in this framework are icons, which signify through resemblance. For example, a portrait, a map, a drawing of a cat, a road sign showing falling rocks. Are icons, but also in spoken language onomatopoeia, such as buzz or bang, and also ideophones or vowel lengthening, such as in it was a long time ago, with the lengthening of long. And so, building on this distinction between these three types of signs and three types of referring, several linguists have shown that every utterance combines different meaning-making strategies. Description, which uses symbols, indication, which relies on indices, and depiction, which relies on icons. Because these concepts of description, indication, and depiction, because they are not tied to the material form of expressions, to a particular channel, or to a given modality, these concepts make it possible to capture the specificities of both sign languages and spoken languages within a common framework. And in this approach, the composite character of utterances is seen as fundamental, not exceptional. I mean, every utterance is seen as composed of many strategies at the same time. Adopting these concepts makes it possible to investigate in spoken utterances phenomena that are well known in the description of sign languages. For instance, the simultaneous use of multiple articulators, the use of iconicity, or pointing in space. This represents an interesting reversal of perspective in which sign language linguistics contributes to the study of spoken languages. In addition to using an appropriate theoretical framework, comparing between sign languages and spoken languages also requires the data to be comparable. And as Sylvia mentioned in the introduction, for LSFB and French, we are happy to have two datasets that meet this requirement of comparability. The LSFB corpus and the spoken French corpus, called Frappé, they were compiled using the same recording protocol. Participants were filmed in pairs and guided by a native moderator in the LSFB Lab recording studio. Speakers and signers carried out the same tasks, alternating between narratives, conversations, explanation, description, etc. A few adaptations only were made, however. For example, in task 4, signers discussed hearing status, whereas speakers discussed relations between French-speaking and Dutch-speaking communities in Belgium. These materials have enabled the development of corpus-based comparative studies of LSFB and French. The members of the laboratory contributed to collecting these data and making them usable for research, and I would like to thank them warmly. And I have also been able to rely and still rely on the patience, expertise, and talent of brilliant researchers in carrying out the first comparative studies of this kind on a range of linguistic phenomena that I will illustrate in the final part of this presentation. I have selected 4 studies, and I will see whether I have the time to go until the end. The first study focuses on constructed action, also referred in the literature as role shift, enactment, or bodily representation. You can see it illustrated here in this extract from Paperman, where the signer in turn represents the actions of the male character and then of the female character, their posture, the direction of their head and gaze, and their facial expression. Let's see the video of this example. Constructed action, as you can see, is a highly depictive structure, highly iconic, and it has been analyzed in different ways. Is it a grammaticalized structure in sign language, marked by obligatory markers, for example? Or should it instead be understood as a structure that is specific to the signed modality? Sébastien van den Niet devoted his PhD dissertation to examining all instances of constructed action found in the productions of 20 participants, 10 signers and 10 speakers, across 2 tasks, a conversation task on language attitudes and a narrative task involving the retelling of either Paperman or Frog Where Are You, the well-known frog story. I will now show one excerpt from the retelling of the frog story in LSFB and another from a conversation in French, where you will be able to see instances of constructed action or enactment. The signer first. The signer tells the beginning of the story, of the frog story, corresponding to the pictures you can see on the screen, at the bottom of the screen here. I let you have a look at them, and then I start the video. So the signer enacts the boy, the actions of the boy, and then the actions of the dog also, with the jar on his head. And now the French speaker is talking about a girl who spoke up in a lecture hall and made a big mistake in French when asking a question, which shocked him. And we will hear that and see that.
On était donc dans un de nos cours de didactique, et il y a une meuf qui lève la main et qui dit excusez-moi, mais si j'aurais bien compris ce que vous avez dit, et je lui dis le si j'aurais qui a retenti dans mes oreilles, j'étais là, c'est une future prof dans 1 an ou 2, j'étais là, si j'aurais, là je l'ai jugé.
So you have seen here the enactment of the girl asking the question, and then the reaction of this guy when he was in the lecture hall. From Sebastian's analysis, I would like to highlight just 2 points here. First, the frequency of constructed action, and second, the articulators involved in representing action. Constructed action can range from 0 to over 75 of speaking or signing time, depending on the participant. It is much more frequent in narrative tasks at the right of the figure than in conversation at the left of the figure. And this is both for signers and for speakers. All participants produce constructed action, although signers do so more on average. What is especially interesting is that participants' profiles are distributed along a continuum. At the top of the figure are the speakers who produce the least constructed action, and at the bottom are the signers who produce the most. Between these two extremes, some speakers show levels of use that are close to those of some signers. I will now turn to the articulators involved in constructed action. Here, you can see the articulators that Sébastien annotated for each instance of constructed action. And this is the result. This heat map highlights a division between two groups of participants according to their articulatory profile. Above the blue line are the signers, and below it are the speakers. And each column of this figure represents an articulator. From left to right, you have first the head, and then gaze, torso, hands and arms together. And the final column represents the voice. The penultimate column corresponds to the use of reported speech as a strategy, which I will not discuss here. The color of each cell, ranging from dark red to dark blue, indicates the relative frequency with which that articulator is used. What emerges is that the head, shown in the first column then, is a predominant articulator in the representation of action. And this is true in both languages. In LSFB, the next most frequently involved articulators are gaze, followed by facial expression. In French, by contrast, they are the hands and arms. And an horizontal reading of the map also shows that combinations of articulators are denser in LSFB than in French. LSFB signers use more articulators simultaneously or together than French speakers. These results suggest that constructed action is neither exclusive to sign languages nor marked by specific obligatory markers. Rather, it appears to be shared. Constructed action is shared by signers and speakers, though realized with different frequencies, articulatory profiles, and variations depending on the task. The second case study I would like to present concerns information structure and more specifically contrastive focus. The example on this slide illustrates what contrastive focus is: an opposition between explicit alternatives forming a closed set of possibilities. Here in the example, the two explicitly mentioned options are cake and ice cream, and the contrastive focus is on cake. I prefer cake over ice cream. Clara Lombard undertook the analysis of the data to identify how contrastive focus is prosodically marked. She used data from 5 signers and 5 speakers in 2 tasks, a colored face description task and an object sorting task. These are the kinds of utterances she investigated systematically. She adopted an audiovisual approach to prosody and, for each instance of contrastive focus, identified not only the vocal cues, but also manual and non-manual cues involved. And now the French-speaking example.
Il y en a 2 au milieu côte à côte et une troisième un peu au-dessus.
So I will play again this one because I forgot to tell you that he's talking about the position of the stars on the head of the character.
Il y en a 2 au milieu côte à côte et une troisième un peu au-dessus.
Here again, I will focus only on a small part of class findings. The literature usually assumes that prosodic realizations differ in signed and spoken languages. In spoken languages, prosodic marking is thought to rely mainly on vocal features, whereas in sign languages, it is said to involve combinations of manual and non-manual articulators. But this literature is based largely on studies that did not take bodily resources into account in spoken languages. Clara's dissertation shows something quite different. In both languages, contrastive focus is marked through combinations of articulators. In spoken French, through voice and gesture, and in LSFB through manual and non-manual movement, shown here in green at the top of the bars. These combinations vary across signers and depending on the communicative context, which means that contrastive focus is not marked by feature specifically dedicated to it. Moreover, changes in the duration of words and signs emerge as a major strategy and in both languages. As for non-manual resources, head movement, again, just like in Sebastian's results, head movements play an important role in both languages. Although there is no clear-cut opposition, LSFB productions generally involve a greater number of non-manual elements and denser combinations than French productions. However, as with the use of constructed action, several speakers and signers show similar ways of using the resources available to them. These observations once again support the idea of a continuum of marking practices rather than a strict opposition between LSFB and French. Adrien Cousin started his PhD in 2024. His research focuses on how reference is established and maintained in LSFB and in French, what resources are used, and what semiotic strategies are involved. The data he analyzes come from 12 participants, 6 in each language, and across 2 tasks, the narrative task and a more interactive task in which participants are spontaneously talking with each other about a childhood memory. Here is an overview of his annotation scheme in ELN. For each mention of a referent in the data, the annotation identifies which referent is concerned, how it is referred to, in other words, through what type of referring expression, a lexical item, a pointing sign, or a depicting sign, and which semiotic strategies are involved. Adrien also annotates the activation status of each referent, as well as its animate or inanimate status, in order to study the influence of these variables, but I will not go into that in detail today. This diagram provides another way of visualizing the annotation process. Each referent mentioned may correspond to one or several types of referring expressions and semiotic strategies. This graph concerns only the data from the narrative task. The interactive task is under work. For LSFB on the left and French on the right, it shows that semiotic strategies used and the ways in which they combine. What emerges is that reference is fundamentally composite. The combination of the three strategies, description, indication, and depiction, called DIP at the bottom of the bars, is the most frequent pattern in the data. By contrast, the exclusive use of descriptive resources, such as lexical items and pronouns, for example, represents only 10 to 13% of the occurrences. This underlines how much is lost when the study of reference is limited to those forms alone. For example, both in French and in LSFB, though more often in LSFB, we find a resource that Liddell calls an invisible surrogate. Here, the referent is introduced through a convergence of indicating forms. The gaze, the torso, the hands, or all the three are directed towards a location in space that is interpreted as referring to that referent. This can be the frog that has disappeared from the jar, or the woman in the building opposite to whom the character in Paperman is desperately gesturing. And also, this systematic comparison also leads to a finding that challenges a commonly held assumption about pointing signs in sign language. Many authors, and I include myself among them, have treated pointing signs as the equivalent of pronouns in French. However, the current results suggest that LSFB pointing signs are actually closer in their use for establishing and maintaining reference, closer to pointing gestures accompanying speech in French. I'm not sure I have the time for the last case study. Pilar, can you tell me? If not, I just jump to the conclusion.
Yeah, if you could go for 5 more minutes, that would be okay. Yeah, I don't know if you have time within 5 minutes.
Okay, then... I will choose a selection of the slides, and thank you. So this final case study concerns reformulation. It is a topic I first worked on alone, then with my colleague Aurélie Sainte, and later also with Silvia Gabarro-Lopez in a 2022 article. And for that study, we analyzed data from 4 signers and 4 speakers, as well as 4 interpreters. Also, I will leave that part aside here. We compared 3 tasks: a conversation task on language attitude, an explanation task based on surprising images to describe, and a narrative task, again using Paperman or the Frog Story. The study was initially inspired by an article by Christian Cuxac on French Sign Language, LSF. in which he argued that the iconic properties of sign language favor a particular type of reformulation. An utterance first produced descriptively through lexical signs and morphosyntactic elements, and then reformulated depictively through iconic structures that allow signers to say by showing. So the aim of our analysis was therefore to test on empirical data whether reformulation is used differently in LSFB and in French, and whether the use of description and depiction also differs across the two languages. Here is an illustration of what we refer to as reformulation, first in LSFB and then in French. I should note that we examined only cases of explicit reformulation. I mean cases involving a reformulation marker. In this case, the sign same, and in French, the word that is or c'est-à-dire. Sorry, I was a bit clumsy. I didn't watch for the interpreter. And then in French.
En fait, ça joue sur l'illusion d'optique. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a deux perspectives.
Well, just one element of analysis before closing. In our data, at least, reformulations are just as frequent in one language as in the other. However, the distribution of reformulations across genres, narrative, explanation, and conversation differs between the two languages. In narrative, French speakers produce more reformulations than LSFB signers. And in conversation, by contrast, the reverse is true. Signers produce more reformulations than speakers. This pattern, which would need to be confirmed with larger samples, of course, but it may reflect a greater fluidity of LSFB resources for narrative discourse and therefore less reformulation, and a greater fluidity of French resources for conversation and therefore again less reformulation. And also at the same time, in both languages, the majority of reformulations combine the strategy of description and depiction. So no modality effect there in the construction of reformulations. Well, a last point to tell that also in terms of reformulation, not only it's important to look at the diversity of semiotic strategies, but also the semiotic strategies that are used to mark that there is a reformulation. For example, in addition to the lexical part of the marker, manual movements also contribute to the marking. For example, in this sequence, you can see the speaker uses the same right-hand movement, both in the first part of the reformulation and in the second part, after the marker. So in other words, reformulation, including its markers, also deserves to be studied in its multimodal and semiotically composite dimension. So what can we take away from all this? I would have emphasized three main points. First, that language is inherently multimodal and semiotically composite. Second, including sign languages offers important insights and opens up a new perspective on the study of language. And third, the so-called modality effect becomes more nuanced when spoken languages are approached multimodally and within a modality agnostic framework. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would like again to warmly thank all the colleagues, collaborators, and participants who contributed to this research. And now I will be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much.